Welcome to the audiobook of Samuel Chamberlain's My Confessions. And if you guys would like to download the audio-only version of this reading, or you want to listen to this on your favorite podcast player, I have just launched a Cormac McCarthy Substack where I'll be posting all of that chapter by chapter commentary on My Confessions and a bunch of other deep dives into Cormac McCarthy content, because Samuel Chamberlain is the kid in Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, and this is one of the most pivotal works of source material for Blood Meridian. So let's hop into the audiobook. Chapter 1, I Leave Home. The day was cold and drear in December 1844 when I bid goodbye to my friends at the Worcester Depot in the good city of Boston and embarked on the train for Norwich en route for the Great West. I was in my 16th year, full of life, yet felt sad and downhearted enough at leaving home for years, if not forever. What a change the last few months had made in my prospect for life. From a promising member of the Baptist Church in Bowdoin Square and a prospective theological student at the Northampton Institute, I was now, to quote the language of the Reverend R.W. Cushman of the above church, worse than the devil. What had produced this change? Who was to blame? Well, I confess, I was to blame. I was the cause. I'd been strictly brought up under religious influences, my reading confined to the Bible and the usual books of a Sabbath school library. And at 14, I considered it my duty to become a member of the church. At 15, I unfortunately, for my religious career, decided to join the junior class at Sheridan's Gymnasium on Washington Street. And here, under the tender instructions of Belcher Kay and Professor Joe Long in sparring and Monsieur Heary in the stick and the small sword, I soon developed into a muscular Christian. And alas, such is the influence of the ungodly that one night in a set to with the professor, I succeeded in getting one in on his knob. I felt more elated than if I had just been ordained over a flourishing church. Then I got hold of Scott's immortal works. What a glorious new world opened before me. How I devoured their pages, and oh, how I longed to emulate his heroes. I took pride in all athletic exercises and was anxious for a chance to use my strength and skill in defense of oppressed beauty. One Sunday, on my way to church, I was insulted by a rough, and on my remonstrating with him for using profound language on the Holy Sabbath, he, with a fearful oath, struck at me. Now, while I was ready to forgive the sinner for his insult to me, I felt it was my Christian duty to punish him for his blasphemy. With my right, I neatly stopped his blow and landed a stinger on his potato trap, with my left duke drawing the claret and sending him to the grass. The rowdy got up and ran down Chardon Street, and I turned to cross over when I saw one of our good deacons with his two lovely daughters passing. From their looks, I knew they had witnessed the little unpleasantness. This alarmed me at first, but when I caught sight of a merry twinkle in the good deacon's eyes and an admiring glance from the young ladies, I felt safe. Other members had seen the incident, and the matter was brought before the church. I was cited before a committee where I somewhat astonished the worthiness by my plea that I consciously believed that I had acted as a good Christian should act, and for the interest of the church. My good friends appeared for me, and I was cleared of all sinful intention in this wholesome rebuke to a sinner. Without egotism, I must confess, however painful it may be to my feelings, that I had always been a favorite with the young sisters. But this little affair gave the darlings such inflated ideas of my prowess that I was in great demand as an escort for them home on prayer meeting nights, monthly concerts, etc. Among the many beautiful girls, there were two who were allowed by all to be preeminent, yet of different styles. One, a splendid brunette with the magnificent black eyes and hair. Miss Anna was all the world to me. The other, a blue-eyed beauty with the face of an angel, was the most errant coquette. Miss Caroline, who caused more heartburning among the pious young brethren than all the rest of the sisters united. Our worthy minister's son, Austin S. Cushman, was the favorite one, yet she would flirt in the most angelic manner with many others. The minister took sides with his son and gave me a severe lecture for going home with the flirt, though there was a perfect understanding between her, Miss Anna, and myself. I did not take him very kindly, and by too free expression of my thoughts made him my enemy. My lessons at the gymnasium continued, and there I formed new associates who were not exactly of the same religious principles as though those of the Bowdoin Square Church, but good fellows nevertheless. My religious record was culminating to a crisis, and soon the bolt fell. One night at singing school, the singing master, David Payne, who was also organist for the church, was ungentlemanly enough to call out the name of my adored one for whispering. The sensitive, high-toned beauty, overcome at the painful insult, burst into tears. I first rushed to her assistance, but finding the sisters were assisting her, I turned on the inhumane author of her woe and declared that no gentleman would thus insult a lady. His answer was to order me to leave the vestry and school. On my declining to do so, he proceeded to put me out. Shades of Beltracque forbid, Harry of the Wind, Ivanhoe, Don Quixote, inspire me to meet this shameless oppressor of girls' rights. He clinched me, and then all the long pent-up knight-errantry and the 7 champions of Christendom consolidated in me, burst, and pain laid prostrate, bleeding, almost annihilated. The tears of my loved one was revenged in blood. But the end was not yet. I had struck a most romantic attitude and exclaimed, "Time!" when I was beset by foes, and though I fought like another black knight, yet I was overcome by numbers and dragged out. My lady love brought out my personal effects, and we retreated to her paternal mansion. Her governor thanked me warmly for resenting the insult to his darling, and that night in the hall my beautiful brunette vowed to be mine, and mine alone forever. So with a swelled face, black eye, and cut lip, I returned her vows and home in a most blissful dream of happiness. This too glaring an act of mine to let pass, and I was again summoned before the outraged church. Some of my friends, the good Deacon Wilbur, Calvin Haven, and a few others, worked hard defending me, but I was expelled. And then my good shepherd, Reverend Cushman, pronounced me as worse than the devil. Coming from such authority, what an excellent character for a boy not yet 16. One consolation was left me, the love of my beautiful brunette, my own queen of hearts. I called that her house. She received me coldly, but explained that though she still loved me, and always should, her parents had forbid her from seeing me after this interview, and she must respect their wishes, and she vowed that though she would obey them in this, she would never marry again. Thus I lost confidence in women's love and faith in religion, and went forth shunned as if I was another Cain. I had at this time formed the acquaintance of Bob Jones, scenic artist at the National Theater, which was now seeing its palmy days, and of his lovely daughter Fanny, who was all the rage of the city bloods. I was soon good friends with the charming Fanny, and was her regular escort home from the theater. She was as charming in mind as in person, in character above suspicion. I found myself a general favorite with all outside of the church. With the Pugs, I was looked upon as a promising future member. The Thespians found in me a useful friend. The Bohemians of the press were beholden to me for many a sensational item, And the ladies, well, I was a boy of a man's proportion, muscles like steel, not bad looking and very modest. I felt unhappy, reckless, and tried in the pleasures of my new life to forget the old. Yet amid all the sensual enjoyments, the times often felt contrite, and I sighed for my former career. And then one kind word would have reclaimed me, but that word was never spoken. In December 1844, I made up my mind to go west and hunt up an uncle of mine, one Adam Chamberlain, who lived somewhere in Illinois. So after this long digression, I go back to where I started, in the carts bound for Norwich, with a sinking pain at heart. The train left the Worcester depot at 4 o'clock, and it seemed to me as if I had left behind all that was worth living for. All the world was before me, but it had no allurements for me. Oh, how I longed to be back as if I was a year before. If I could only live my life over again, I thought, and I not yet 16. As we dashed across the back bay, the snow commenced to fall, and the would-be hero fell fast asleep. At Norwich, I awoke and embarked on the steamer John W. Richmond for New York. The Sound was full of floating ice, which with a heavy snowstorm made the passage anything but a pleasant one. Several times we run onto huge cakes of ice, jarring the boat from stem to stern. The bell was kept ringing, the steam whistle shrieking. The ladies would rush out of their staterooms in fright. There was but little sleeping on the boat that night. In New York, I took a cab for the Jersey ferry, rode one up the street and down another, and found myself close to the pier from where I started, the ferry being the next ship. For this little experience in New York style, the cabbie only charged me the sum of $2. I thought it dear at 50 cents and said that that's all I would give. He threatened to keep my trunk, whereupon I caught hold of one handle as he held on to the other. As he pulled back, I gave a shove, when in order to save himself from falling, he let go, and I gained the ferry boat in safety. That night, I stopped in Baltimore and then took the cars for Chamberlain via Harper's Ferries. Owing to some 6 inches of snow on the track, our progress was very slow, even with the assistance of an extra engine. We arrived at Harper's Ferry at about noon. The dinner bells of the hotels were ringing, and the conductor shouted, 20 minutes for dinner! The men rushed for the dining rooms, paying 50 cents for the fare. The landlord was a long time carving and serving, and not more than a half a dozen had commenced to eat. When the good engine bell rung, the cry was, all aboard! This trick upon travelers was too palpable to pass, even with me. And when a jolly red-faced old gentleman cried out, help yourselves, gentlemen, I obeyed orders with a hearty goodwill by sequestering a roast chicken and an apple pie. In spite of the remonstrance of the outflanked landlord, the table was relieved of all of its eatables, and we ate our dinner in the cars with our lady passengers to grace the feast. And a right jolly time we had of it. I shared my plunder with 2 elderly ladies who contributed by producing a well-filled lunchbox and a pocket companion of good brandy. We reached Cumberland at dark. A glowing fire in the parlor and a hot supper set us all to rights and prepared us for a cold night's ride into the mountains, this being the terminus of the railroad. Although there was 2 feet of snow on the ground, the stages that run to Wheeling were on wheels, without buffalo robes, nothing but straw to keep our limbs from freezing. The thermometer was down to 0. I secured a back seat, and the center one, with a man on one side and a lady on the other. I offered the latter my seat as being warmer, but it was declined. It was so dark inside that I could form no idea whether she was old or young, handsome or ugly, but I was certain she was not one of my brandy-drinking acquaintances of the dinner, as they had concluded to stop in Cumberland overnight. And when we left, they were at their 4th glass of hot peach and honey. Wrapping myself up in my fur-lined overcoat, I tried to sleep. But it was so bitter cold, I could not rest. I would drop into an uneasy slumber, disturbed by the horrid dreams, and would awake numb with cold. The miserable night ended at last, and when the early dawn gave us light, I gave an anxious look at my bowers. The right one was a 250-pound Negro, his breath a villainous compound of whiskey, tobacco, and onions. I gave him a shove when a gentle sigh drew my attention to my left. By Venus, what a contrast! A young and lovely girl, richly and warmly clothed in velvets and furs, was reclining her head on my shoulder, fast asleep. I got rid of my sable friend on my right and devoted my whole attention to my friend on my left. I found it necessary to preserve her equilibrium, to put my arm around her, and we passed over many a mile, when a sudden jolt awoke the beauty, who looked at me with a surprise and apologized for the freedom she took in using my shoulder, and I for being so familiar as to have my arm where it was, as I deemed it necessary to keep her from falling. We were soon chatting away as if we had been acquainted all of our lives. But then it don't take long to be intimate when the parties have slept together. She informed me that she was the daughter of the late Senator Fulton of Arkansas, who died recently in Washington. His remains had been shipped from New York for New Orleans. She said that she had been 3 terms to the Georgetown Female Seminary and was now on her way home with the gentleman, her guardian, who she pointed out, the red-faced old gentleman who gave orders to secure a dinner at Harper's Ferry. She was a great talker, and her eyes that were jet black, how they would sparkle, dance, and flash as she would run on. How fast her questions came. Before we stopped to breakfast, I knew her whole story, and she as much of mine as I chose to tell. She was sorry that I was a Yankee, but when I assured her that I had never made a wooden nutmeg or peddled a wooden cloak in my life, she thought better of me. She was some 3 years older than myself, and when she found this out, she commenced to patronize me most fearfully. After a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs, broiled chicken, corn and wheat bread, butter, honey, and coffee, we again started on our way. I made an objection to having His Sable Majesty ride inside, but I was verdant to Southern customs. A young Virginian, the master of the Negro, got into a rage and swore that the boy was worth $1,200 and doggone his buttons if he would allow him to catch his death. A cold for all the cursed Yankees that ever wore store clothes. I did not object to his care for his property, but then the contemptuous allusion to myself rather excited me. I felt as if Plymouth Rock, Bunker Hill, and the Frog Pond weighed upon my shoulders. I had taken this representative of the Southern chivalry by the collar when the voice of my beauty made me recollect that there was ladies present. What a little temptress she was. She declared that the Negro should not ride in the coach, that his master was a mean white, that if the Negro caught cold and died, she would pay for him, but ride in the same coach he should not. Her guardian laughed at the rage of his ward, when her violent rage subsided in hysterical tears. But her point was gained. The Virginian, with a savage look at me, took passage with this chattel in another coach. We had the back seat all to ourselves, and as her jolly old guard gave her a lap robe, we got along very comfortably. Coming to a large, steep hill, most of the passengers got out to walk. There had been a strong crust on the snow. The walking was excellent. She gave me an introduction to Mr. Weinman, her guardian. At first, he was as crusty as the snow, but gradually thawed and produced a bottle of cordial. And after we each took a drink, he showed me more cordiality. He soon got tired, left us, and resumed his seat in the coach. Her ladship's tongue ran faster than ever. She described her home. The imaginary home of Claude Melot paled before her description of her paradise on the Arkansas, of the cotton fields, the 100 slaves, and she the sole heiress of all. During this walk, she often said, "It's too bad you are a Yankee. How I wish you were a Southerner." The day passed pleasantly enough, walking up hills and riding down, with a glorious dinner and supper at wayside inns. At the place where we got supper, Mr. Wyman purchased a heavy quilt for his fiery little charge, and we took our seats for another night's ride. We were well prepared for it. With our furs, robe, and quilt, the back seat all to ourselves, and pressed into each other's arms, we thought the weather had wonderfully moderated. We felt no cold. In fact, we were all in a glow, and if our lips did meet in blissful kisses, it could not be wondered at. We at last fell asleep and did not awake until the stage drew up at the door of the United States Hotel in Wheeling at 3 o'clock in the morning. The passengers were so numb and cramped with cold that most of them had to be carried into the hotel. Mr. Wyman, the guardian, was undeniably drunk. I'm sorry to record it, but the truth compels me to make the statement. His bottle was empty. He tried to sing, made a failure, and sank into a chair and was soon asleep. I booked the names, had him carried up to his room, and returned to look after my fair charge. The office room was crowded as other stages had arrived. A glorious soft coal fire blazed up in an open grate. The jovial landlord and assistants were busy attending to the various calls and concocting mysterious hot drinks. Colored servants were carrying trunks and showing the sleepy ones to their rooms. My charmer was seated in an easy chair, her eyes fixed on the glowing coals, and as I watched her brilliant features lit up by the fire, I thought, I never saw a more charming girl, and my loyalty to my loved one at home was seriously tried. When the colored girl came to show her her room, I assisted her to rise. With a silly laugh, she said to my astonishment, "Don't leave me, love. Come with me." I saw that she had a touch of the same complaint that troubled her guardian. In fact, she had taken too much strong, hot whiskey, and the heat of the room sent it to her head. To avoid a scene, I went with her and the girl to her room door, and then I was obliged to tear myself away. Next morning, Miss Fulton did not make her appearance at the breakfast table, but that afternoon we walked out and she was as loving as ever. The Ohio River was frozen up solid. No boats had passed for over a week. The town was full of strangers, the hotel crowded, the price of board gone up, and no signs of a thaw. Some few days after this, I and my enchantress took a long walk on the hills. She was more quiet than usual, and after walking on some time in silence, she remarked, "We are going back to Baltimore in a few days. You will accompany us, of course." I hesitated, and her eyes blazed up with a sudden fury, and she broke out with, "You must and shall come. I always have my own way, and I say you shall go with me and live with me," and threw her arms around me and sobbed like a child. Somehow this violent exhibition of passion killed all my tender feelings for her, and I tried to make her understand that it was impossible, that I must go on to Illinois, that I was a mere boy, not 16, poor and without friends, with nothing but his own strength to fight the battles of life, while she was a young lady of 19, rich and with a host of friends. The thing was not possible. I might as well have reasoned with the whirlwind. She fairly raved, declared that I did not love her. Then she would call me a mean Yankee, and she would say she hated me, her guardsy should kill me, and then the next moment declare she would marry me and go on to Illinois with me. I almost consented. Visions of returning to Boston with the rich heiress as my wife, the sensation it would make, flittered before me. I really liked the girl. I blamed myself for the part I had taken, but I thought of the one so dear to me at home, of my desire to go into and see the world. With my arm around her waist, I solemnly swore that I would join her as soon as I could after visiting Illinois. She became satisfied. We vowed to eternal love and constancy, ratified our engagement with many a kiss, and I intended fully to keep my contract to the letter and spirit. 2 days after, they started back to Baltimore to proceed there by southern route. Our parting took place in the privacy of her own room, and we considered ourselves man and wife. As she rode away, I regretted that I had not gone with them. I had paradise open before me, and I had refused to enter. I was perfectly miserable and mad with myself. I rode as agreed on to Baltimore, stated all my feelings and regrets, and 5 days after I got 3 loving and tender letters, but not an answer, as she had not received mine yet.